Well, today is Tuesday, January the 13th, 2026, and we are talking with Harvey Morgan of Gloucester. Thank you, Harvey, for doing this, and welcome.
Thank you, Bill. I'm delighted to be with you.
Can you start off talking about your early childhood, where you were born?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Well, I was born in Gloucester. I was born at home on Duval Avenue, and my brother was also, and my sister was, but she was born in a house across the street from the one I was born in. But everybody was born at home in those days. Dr. Harry Tabb was our physician, and as far as I know, the birth all went well, and we grew up. We grew up on Duval Avenue.
Who were your childhood friends?
Well, my closest friend was Fayette Wyatt, who he lived next door, and his sister Nancy and Roberta, sisters. Roberta was 2 years younger than I, is 2 years younger than I, and she and my sister, who was 2 years younger, were closer to the same age. My brother Jimmy is 3 years older than I. So I was born in 1930.
And how about the Core boys? Did he live on Main Street?
Which Core?
Oh, gee, I'm not sure what his first name was, Harvey.
Are you talking about the one who was lost in the service?
No.
Okay.
I think he's still alive. He lived down in Atlanta, I believe. Well, Arthur? Arthur Core?
I don't know.
Okay.
Arthur Core. But Lauren
Core, yeah.
He's deceased now.
Oh,
but Lauren and Jimmy were closest friends. Okay. And Lauren's brother, Woody, was lost during World War II. He was in a B-24 and his plane went down over Truck Island.
Oh, wow.
Early in the war.
Well, y'all's playground, was it the woods behind your house, behind Main Street?
We had a nice pine thicket back there, and also the woods all around us behind it was on both sides of Duval Avenue, really, but we had wonderful woods back there where what we call Squirrel Hill, which later on I bought and built a house. I lived back there. But I remember playing cowboys and Indians back there, and Army. We had an Army camp too, but we would put on. We would take a towel and a belt and make a loincloth, and my mother would let us use her makeup. So we'd put war paint on, and we had a roasting pot top as a shield, and the handle was how I would hold it, and we would fight the Indians. I was an Indian then. We'd fight anybody else. But we had an Army camp also. That was at a different time. Various times we had lots of activities. And as a matter of fact, we had, when they were building the sewer system and the water system, and we had deep trenches through our backyards. And on one occasion we had an organized clod fight with Lewis Avenue. It was Duval Avenue against Lewis Avenue. And then other boys in the neighborhood would join on one side or the other. And my mother would pack a lunch. We'd go and we'd throw cards at each other all morning, and then we'd have a truce for lunch. And then I remember it well because after lunch I was thirsty, and we started up the fight again, and I was crawling on my stomach down this hill. It was back up behind Lewis Avenue, and there's a wonderful spring back there with fresh pure water, and I was crawling down to get a drink of water. And I turned my head to look, and I caught it right in the mouth. and I will remember it just as well as it happened yesterday.
Now, who was on the other side? The guys from...
Everybody lived on Lewis Avenue. Now Billy DeHardt and Frank Phillips and Mr. Hopel's son, Harry Hopel's, Fred Hopel, and I guess his brother was a little too young to be. Oh, Hugh Dishinger, I'm sure. And then some of the folks from up Main Street, like, I can't think of his name, others would join us on one team or the other. But I had on my army uniform. I had a World War I army uniform with a tin helmet and leggings, and I would wear that when I went to fight the Cloud battles.
Now, did Hilda Lawson own or have some property back off of Lewis?
Yes, she had property on Lewis Avenue and Duval Avenue. And Johnny Hopewell had told a story about Hilda in his book. Have you read Johnny's book?
I think so.
It's a wonderful book. Anyway, one day his mother wanted him, excuse me, go to the spring and get some watercress, and so he was on the way down and he heard her car. And I think she blew the horn or something. And she always carried a shotgun with her. Not always, but frequently. And he didn't know what to do, so he took the roundabout way to get to the spring. he avoided her like the plague. Because she was a good woman, but she was boisterous and threatening in her tone. The children were afraid of her. She had 3 dogs, and one of them was named Mike. And we swore that she fed them raw meat and gunpowder because she kept them in a pen on Duval Avenue.
Now, did Hilda ever live here in the hotel?
Yeah, she lived right in this building, and
did she help run it, or was it just her sister?
No, her sister ran it. She was like a farmer. She raised daffodils. She was very serious as a daffodil farmer. And but Pauline Tucker Duncan, who lived worked in the Court Green Circle, had a story about her because there was a squirrel that they were encouraging to stay over in the Court Green, and she was feeding the squirrel. And one day the squirrel made the mistake of going up on the hotel porch, and Hilda shot it. Pauline could have shot her. She was so mad. She was really, really very mad. I'll drink some of this water. I assume that's what it's for.
Yeah.
But Hilda enjoyed being difficult. Mr. Duval, Thaddeus Duval, T.E. Duval, who developed Duval Avenue and lived 2 doors from us at what was the end of the avenue at that time. Excuse me. Mr. Duval had donated the property, I think, for the avenue. Anyway, beyond his house, there was a right-of-way that I don't know how they had worked it out, but he owned one half and she owned the other half, and they would argue from time to time. She drove a black Ford coupe. All cars were black in those days, but it was like a 1935 Ford. And one day they were out there arguing. She had stopped to talk to him, and he was, I don't know, he didn't put his head in the window, but he was close to her. And she got mad at him, and she drove off, and all of a sudden and ran over his toe. I don't think anything ever came of that, but it was an ongoing feud between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. Now, your brother Jimmy was younger than you.
Jimmy was older, 3 years older.
Jimmy was older.
Yeah.
And he's the one that had the
Scribe.
Small little newspaper.
Right. Yeah, he started the Scribe when he was, I think, 12. And the first edition, Mother had developed, had bought some sort of purple gelatin that you put in a wide flat pan, and you wrote it in the gelatin, and then to put the paper on that, and it printed. You lifted the paper off, and you could see the writing, and that there weren't very many copies of the first issue, but I have you seen them?
You loaned them to me.
Yeah.
And I had them copied, and we put a copy in the library.
Good. Yeah.
So a copy is there, because when you had your fire, when you talk about your fire, I think you said the fire destroyed most of those copies.
It may have, but I had some. I think one of Jimmy's boys. Yeah, Joe had a series of the papers, and he had them printed and gave them to me. So I still have one, I think.
Oh, good.
But it was fun. Every week he wrote it, and my cousin Bobby Hart from Cologne was the sports editor, and he would send the sports page down by the mail truck, because they had a post office at Cologne, and he would send it down to Gloucester, and I guess the mail truck driver would just bring it over and give it to Jimmy. I'm not sure how they did it.
Now,
but he would write all the baseball, primarily baseball.
How old was Jimmy when he did this?
He started when he was 12, and he went on to about 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And Bobby was 10 days younger than Jimmy, so they were the same age. But Francis Duvall was involved, and he had 4 or 5 boys who wrote different parts. As I say, Bobby wrote the sports, but local news, Jimmy would collect from wherever. I remember one headline was somebody's hen house burning down, and they had a picture of it in the paper. And I don't know if there's a photograph or a drawing, but it showed the chicken house burning, and
that was the big news of the week.
That was a headline.
Well, Harvey, tell us about your dad. I know he was a pharmacist and came from Portsmouth.
Yeah. He came to Gloucester in 1922. He had just graduated pharmacy school. And Mr. H.A. Wolfe, who was related, he had married Catesby Jones's, one of the Jones girls' sister, Catesby Sr.'s sister, I think. And he was a jeweler, and he had a jewelry store and Gloucester Pharmacy in the building of Mr. Martin's grocery store, and it was like 16 feet wide of the length of the store, and it was close to pharmacy at that time, and he operated it. And in those days, you didn't have to be a pharmacist to operate a pharmacy. And they filled prescriptions from the local doctors. And also, I think Mr. Dick Janney, Sam Janney's father, was like, he was not the true veterinarian, but he practiced veterinary medicine for the local farmers. And sure, they would fill the prescriptions there. Anyway, when Dad had finished pharmacy school in 1922, and they were changing the laws then to require the pharmacist to fill prescriptions. So Mr. Wolf put out the word to the pharmacy salesman, the drug company representatives, that he would like to have a pharmacist. And my father's brother was a pharmacist in Portsmouth. Daddy was the youngest of 6 children, and he was 6 years younger than the one ahead of him. So he had a number of older siblings who were mature. One was a teacher, one was a pharmacist, one was a seaman, and his father was harbor master of Hampton Roads, and he had an important job, but they lived in Portsmouth. And anyway, Daddy got the message that they needed a pharmacist in Gloucester. So he decided to come and apply for the job. And do you know how long it took him to get here? He left his home early in the morning, took a streetcar to the ferry dock, to the Norfolk ferry. Took the ferry to Norfolk, took another streetcar to the Newport News ferry dock. And then when he got to Newport News, he took the train to Lee Hall. And at Lee Hall, there was a jitney, which happened to be driven by John Hogg, who was a local character, the local mechanic at the garage at the corner of Duval Avenue and Main Street at one time in his life. Anyway, John was the driver of this jitney, and he met him at Lee Hall. Then they went to Yorktown and took the ferry to Gloucester, and when it got to Gloucester, Route 17 didn't exist. There was not a single paved road. This was 1922. There were no paved roads in all of Gloucester County. And it took him until late afternoon to get to Gloucester Courthouse. They went up through all the old post offices. They went White Marsh and Money and.
Was this on a bus or?
Yeah, it was like a bus. Okay. Yeah, they called it a jitney, but it was like a early station wagon maybe. And crossed the old concrete bridge down the hill, and came on up and went around the underpod tree, and he checked into this hotel right here, and the next day he went over and applied for a job. And there were 2 young men there, 2 high school boys working there. Can't think of their names, but both of them we knew well. But anyway, one of them looked at the other one and said, "He'll never last." Not only outlasted him, he outlived him.
Was your dad offered the job on the spot?
I think so, because he stayed.
He never left.
He never left. And it came in 1922, and he was 21 years old, and he was almost 98 when he died. 3
Yeah.
months from 98.
Now, Harvey, give me the placement. I know the store was across the street from the hotel, and y'all had part of it. And later on, did y'all have another building before you moved down to Hitch Hill?
Mr. Martin had J.H. Martin and Company, which was a grocery store. He had a haberdashery upstairs. They sold material and latest clothing and so forth, I think, upstairs. But downstairs was the grocery store. But one section of the grocery store was about 16 feet wide. The store was probably 50 feet long. And so the drugstore was like 16 feet, maybe 20 feet wide by the full length of the store. And later on, in 1933, Mr. Martin built the new store for Daddy, and that's the building that was immediately next door. Mr. Martin's store was a concrete block store, and they built them a concrete block drugstore, and it's what was the antique shop there for a while after we left. We moved out of it in the 60s down to Hitch Hill, and we had a really nice business then. Mr. Gray, Stanley Gray, had the pharmacy across the street from us, and we were friendly competitors. We would borrow from each other. If we ran out of something, we would borrow from him, and vice versa. We got along very well. In fact, their wives were friends. Mother and Mrs. Gray were good friends, and we all went to the Presbyterian church, and it was a good rivalry. What was I going to say about that? Oh, when they built the new store, I apparently was 3 years old, and I wanted to help move, so they let me help. They let me carry the ice cream dippers to the new store.
Well, there's a story that I've heard you mention that your dad may have been the first firefighter in Gloucester.
Well, in a sense, yeah. Dad had about 8 or 10 of these soda acid fire extinguishers, these brass tanks that stand about this tall and have a hose on them. And what it is, it's soda water that you put in the tank, and then there's a little glass at the top, glass like a little ink bottle that goes in the top, and you fill that with hydrochloric acid, and they just sit there until you need it, and then you turn it upside down, and the acid and the soda water mix and create pressure. And the pressure comes out the hose. The hose is on the side of the tank. And you turn it upside down, and then you direct the hose to the fire. And we had 8 of them in the men's restroom at the drugstore the whole time I knew about it. And I have one of them now, I think, at home. But they were brass. You've seen them.
Yeah.
But one fire he was called to was down at just near Ware Academy. It was on Indian Road, and Daddy threw the fire extinguishers into the car and started that down the road. When he made the turn at Edge Hill, he was going a little too fast, and they all turned over, and it was spraying all over the car. So he stopped and turned it back up, and then continued on. Car was all messed up, but it was like soda water, and there was still some oomph left in the fire extinguisher. So when he got to the fire, he was able to get it put out.
Well, you had mentioned that some time ago that the first fire truck in Gloucester was horse-drawn or people-drawn?
Is that people drawn? Yeah, it was a cart. And they bought it from Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg had this hose cart that you pull by hand. You maybe could have rigged it for a horse, but there was men would pull it. And I remember when they put that in because we had a fire at our house when I was about 2 years old, and there was no fire department then, but they got fire at the fish pond. Everybody had a fish pond, and so they would had a bucket brigade from the fish pond next door up to our attic, and put a ladder on against the house, and then they had several men on there passing the bucket stuff. Fire was in the attic. It was a chimney fire.
Now, you said everybody had a fish pond. I remember my Uncle Bernard, B.B. Roan, had a fish pond behind his house.
Yeah.
What was that just to look at the fish, or did you let them grow and eat them?
They may have had them as the second purpose might have been to have a source of water for fire. But I never thought of that. I know we had one. Actually, we didn't have one. The house next door to us had one, and the house across the street from us had one. There were several fish ponds.
And where did they keep the fire truck or the fire car?
Fire truck, the hose car was kept right behind the bank of Gloucester. There's a little shed there, and next to Martin's store, there was an alley between Martin's store and the bank, and there was a little shed back there, and they kept the hose car in there.
Now, Harvey, your mother was from this area.
Yes, she was from Cologne.
She was a Bland. Can you talk about her somewhat?
Oh yeah. Her father was born right near Cologne, but he was a storekeeper too, and he and his brother-in-law, was good. Okay. Mother's father, Sam Bland, his sister was married to the man that operated one post office. His name was Benny Williams, and Papa and my grandfather and Benny apparently were partners at one point. They had a store at the old mill where they
At Cow Creek.
Cow Creek. I couldn't think of it. Cow Creek, and where later on the skating rink was put right there, and the store I think became the office of the skating rink. But they had the store had closed by then, and Papa had opened a store at Cologne, and Benny Williams had opened the store at Juan, which is where Academy is now. Mm-hmm. They just took down his store building, which he and his wife lived above that, and their daughter, Mary Russell. Mary Russell Williams married John Hogg, the man who brought Daddy up the road. And there's so many stories I'm telling to my mother. But when my mother and Mary Russell were friends, and they used to play together as little girls. And one day they were down at the old mill, and they dangling their feet in the race, and the wheel race where the water wheel was. And the miller chased them away, and they said, "You're slowing down the water." They knew that wasn't true, but he just didn't want them to get hurt. Anyway, Mary Russell, when Mother went to college, she went to what is now Longwood. It was the state normal school at that time. She wrote to Mother and said, "You've got to come, when you come home after school, it was in the springtime, you've got to come and visit because we've got a new pharmacist at the drugstore, and we need to go meet him." So Mother and Mary Russell got together, and they decided that they wanted to meet him, but they didn't want to buy anything. So they made a list of things to ask for that they knew he wouldn't have. They went to the store, and they gave him one item, and he looked around and couldn't find anything. He came back, said, "I'm sorry, we don't have that." And it happened over and over. That some he knew he didn't have, but Mother used, in her later years, with a twinkle in her eye, said, "He didn't know it then, but he never had a chance."
Now, Otis Bland was a delegate at one time from this area.
He was a congressman.
Was that a relative of your mother's?
No, perhaps distant. Congressman Otis Bland, and Miss Lola Bland, it was his sister. She had a house here in Gloucester, and her sister married Mr. Martin, Jim Martin. So they were related, and Miss Bland lived with her sister next door to the drugstore in her later years. She also had a house on the York River, which we called Camp Lola. It was a house without any plumbing, without any electric lights, and it was just a plain house. And we called it Camp Lola. And we enjoyed it. We would go there in the summertime for a week or two. And every day Mother would go up and buy ice from the store to put in the ice box to keep food cold. And we would have our relatives come and visit us, and we'd have half a dozen kids there. There were three of us, and then we would have other cousins from Portsmouth and King and Queen, and we would tell ghost stories, and we'd go swimming, and we'd go. The York River was right in front at the front door, and we would come back from swimming, and we would draw water from the well, and then slosh this ice cold water on each other to rinse the salt off. And I can remember it now. It's just like it was yesterday.
What part of the county? You say on the York River?
It was you know where all the Indian artifacts have been discovered.
At Purton?
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's Purton.
They call it the Werewolf Wacomico?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this house was right there. And the house that the family that discovered the shells and the artifacts wasn't there then. And it's just maybe 50 yards from where this house was.
Okay.
This was just a plain house. And we had no idea. We didn't see. I don't remember anybody ever discovering any artifacts. But she had discovered all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's interesting that we had the same spot.
Yeah, that is. Harvey, can you talk a little bit about how you became a Republican and became the delegate to the House.
That it is an interesting story because nobody ever ran as a Republican ran. I remember one or two people running as Republicans that they never get many votes, and they weren't well known. But when I was asked to run, John Warren Cook had been our delegate for 38 years, and much beloved by all. And when he decided to retire, at the same time that who was running for president, anyway, the man who was running for president as a Democrat, I just couldn't abide. I didn't agree with him at all. And the man who was running for governor was the current lieutenant governor, who was a very fine man, but just too liberal for me, and he didn't win. And the man who was running for president didn't win either. I don't think who it was. Anyway, but the Republicans came to me and asked me if I would consider it. And I'd been thinking about it anyway. They didn't know that.
Was that Olin Lewis?
Olin was one of them, yeah. And Olin was the chairman of the party then. And Republicans were on the ascension at that time, but it was not, nobody wanted to be identified as a Republican. It was just, we just didn't run as Republicans. So anyway, I agonized over it a long time, and I sat down with Daddy when I finally decided to do it. And he said, well, I knew you were going to do it, but did you have to run as a Republican? And I didn't know until that day he had never voted anything except Democrat. And but he did vote for me. Anyway, I didn't know until that night that he had never voted any other way. And I would go to meetings afterwards. I was elected. I would go to meetings in Hampton and Newport News, and people would come up to me and say, "You're our delegate." I mean, people from over there, because they didn't have any Republicans representing them. Herb Bateman was the state senator, and he had been a Democrat, and he'd switched, and he was the only other Republican office holder in the whole Middle Peninsula, the Peninsula, Lower Peninsula, or Middle Peninsula.
Do you have any interesting stories that you'd like to talk about in politics? And by the way, how long were you in office? 30-some years?
32 years, yeah. But I'm a piker by John Warren Cook. He was our delegate for 38 years. And he was always wonderful to me. He didn't agree with my running as a Republican, but he was nice to me, and I would go by and talk to him before the session and after the session, and I would try to seek his advice. Oh no, you'll do fine. And he would never give me any advice. Then I would come back home after the session was over and tell him what we did. Well, I don't know how I would have done that. It was so funny. But everybody loved John Warren Cook. Both sides of the aisle. He was a speaker for the last 12 years. And for a number of years after I was elected, people would come up to me and say, "How's the real speaker?" Because none of the new speakers could hold a candle to him.
Yeah. Well, Harvey, what other interesting stories would you like to share?
I thought of several while I was talking. One story maybe about my mother, or my great-grandmother on my mother's side. During the Civil War, she and a slave that was part of their family were driving a horse cart one day, and the Yankee soldiers came up to them and were threatening to take their horse. And this was my mother's grandmother. And she said, "You can take this old bag of bones if you want. You've taken everything else." So they didn't take it. And that'll keep it. But my grandfather, my mother's grandfather, my great-grandfather, was what is his first name? DeLotus was his middle name, Bland. And he was wounded during the Civil War. He lived in Middlesex. And he was an oyster farmer. He was an oysterman. Anyway, he was wounded and he came home after the war and resumed his livelihood. And then he wasn't doing very well, and he died. And he had married a girl from Wayanac, a Brown. And so the Brown family came over by boat to Middlesex, to Urbana, and picked up all of it was my grandmother's children. I don't know how many there were. She and her children and their household belongings, and brought them back to Wayanac by boat. Regular oyster's gift, oyster. I don't know what kind of boat it was, but they brought all of the belongings back to Wayanac, and that's where my grandmother grew up.
Well, Harvey, having talked, you went to the Presbyterian Church here on Main Street. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk a little bit about the church? And
sure. I am now the longest standing member. I'm not the oldest in age. There's some older people, I think, than I am. But nobody's been a member of that church longer than I have. And,
wow.
And Fayette Wyatt and I were the oldest for a long time. And then Carrie Franklin, who died just recently. But they were senior to me. Well, Fayette and I joined the same day.
Okay.
And so we were the oldest. But anyway, it was nicknamed the Calf Pasture Church by Dr. E.T. Welford. Dr. Welford was a Presbyterian minister who lived at what's the subdivision right as you go into Wayanac on the right.
Glenroy.
Glenroy. Dr. Welford was a Presbyterian minister, and I don't know where he was from, but he bought Glenroy plantation and lived there when he retired. He was a minister of the First Presbyterian Church in Newport News, but he referred to our church as the Calf Pasture because it was a small church, and we couldn't afford to have a regular minister most of the time, and so we would get seminary students. They would come down on weekends and preach, and then they would go back, and then we would hire them if we could. So we had a lot of young ministers and they'd stay for several years, and then they would be called somewhere else. So I always thought it was funny that he called that the Calf Pasture.
I haven't heard that one. That's a good one.
But it's a wonderful church, and it is it has been flexible, and it's grown through the years. We separated from Presbyterian Church U.S. about 7 or 8 years ago, and that was traumatic. But the great majority of the members went together and decided to leave because there were procedures in the national church that we didn't agree with at all. It was improper, and so we've done very well as in another setting.
Harvey, while you were talking, it reminded me of a story you told me one time about your father going to a basketball game or football game.
Oh yeah, that's a good story. Right. Well, first of all, before Mother and Daddy were married, she was teaching in Urbana, and he would drive back and forth. He had a Ford Roadster of some sort, and he would drive over to see her at night. And one night, and she was boarding at a home over there, for the family, and he called her. And of course, you know, our operator system, telephone system, was everything. The only thing we knew then.
And Louise Ambrose used to.
She was a principal operator. Everybody knew was Lou. But Daddy called my mother on the phone, and while he was waiting for her to come to the phone, he was singing to himself. Yes, sir, she's my baby. No, sir, don't mean maybe. Sir, she's my baby now. And the operator chimed in and said, well, everybody knows it. Anyway, one night he was driving over to see her, and it was in the wintertime, and all the roads were dirt roads. As I said, we didn't have a single paved road in the county, and Route 17 didn't exist in those days. And so he was on the way to see her, and he came up behind a car that was stuck in the ruts, and couldn't turn and couldn't get out. And so Daddy couldn't get by him, and he had to spend the night like that. And his Ford didn't have a heater, but it had a panel and a disc, I think, in the floorboard, and it could turn that disc, start the engine, and the heat from the engine would come up through the floor. And of course, he had a bearskin rug or some sort of cowhide rug that everybody had in their car in case of need, and he wrapped that around himself. And every now and then he'd start the car up and run it for a while and warm up, and then he'd turn it off. And the next morning, found a farmer with a tractor, I think, to pull the other guy out, and Daddy was able to finally get turned around and go back to work.
That's a good story, Harvey.
And did I tell you about singing?
Yeah.
Oh, he was. But Lou, the operator, saying, yep, everybody knows it. He was saying, yes, sir, she's my baby. I did tell you that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the other one was a basketball game. They'd gotten married, and he and several of his buddies went to a basketball game in Richmond one night, and they left Gloucester late afternoon. And at that time, there was no bridge across the
Monkey.
Pamunkey. Yeah, they had a bridge across it from Mattapanai, and that road went on up through King and Queen, and then you got on that main road from Tappahannock to Richmond. But anyway, so they went to the game and enjoyed the game. On the way back, one of the guys was driving, and he missed the turn at Central Garage, and instead of coming down through King and Queen, they realized that they were going to go through Tappahannock. and it's a much farther distance. So they did it. But on the way up, the key part of the story I forgot. On the way up, when they went past Adner, we made the turn off Route 17, what is now Route 17, to go up through King and Queen. Mr. Wolf, who was a World War I veteran, I think he had only one leg, and he used a crutch. But he had a wooden leg and a crutch.
And he lived in that farmhouse right there on the corner.
Right.
It was torn down
That's
40
right.
years or so
That's
ago.
right. He was walking from the barn to the house, and Daddy commented to his buddies, "There's Mr. Wolf. He's done his day's work, and he's milked his cows. Now he's going home and get supper." And didn't think any more about it. Well, when they were coming home the next morning, because they'd had to go through Tappahannock, they were coming up, they came right by the house. Mr. Wolf was walking from the house to the barn. and Dad said, "Mr. Wolf has had his supper and a good night's sleep and his breakfast. Now he's going back to milk his cows, and we haven't even gotten home yet."
Wow. It was quite a hike in those days.
It was.
Yeah. Good story. Well, Harvey, do you have any more stories you'd like to share?
I have a legislative story. I was called to Urbana, to Deltaville one day by an attorney over there. And he explained to me that he had a young constituent client who could not get a decent position in the Army because he had been convicted of marijuana offense. And he said, they've changed the laws, they've lightened it up and so forth. It's not as like it used to be, but it still interferes with people being able to have a normal activity in the service. And so wonder if I could do something about it. Well, I sat down with the attorney in the Division of Legislative Services and talked about it. And so he drafted a bill for me. And I was totally unsuccessful getting anything done. And I tried 5 different times, not 5 consecutive years, 5 different times to get to not to legalize. I wasn't interested at all in legalizing marijuana, but I wanted to decriminalize it, like a parking ticket or something, so it would not be treated by the federal government as it's a Schedule I drug, which is all the most dangerous drugs are Schedule I drugs, and it should not be a Schedule I drug, but they've never changed it. And I tried and failed each time. Well, the last time I tried it, and it wasn't 5 consecutive years, it was over a period of maybe 7 years or so. The last time, and I'll have to say that, let me back up. The members, this bill always goes before the Courts of Justice Committee, and it goes to the criminal subcommittee. They have a criminal and a civil subcommittee. And it always goes to the criminal subcommittee because it comes in that section of the code. Well, the last several times, the chairman of the subcommittee would come to me and said, "Now, you know we're not going to hear this bill, but do you want to bring it before the subcommittee?" And I said, "Oh yes, I do," because I had a lot of support for it, and earnest people. veterans and others, physicians. One local physician in Gloucester used to come up and try to help me with the bill. Anyway, the last time I brought that bill forward, the chairman came to me and said, "Do you want me just to pass this by, or do you want to come to the committee?" I said, "I want to come to the committee because it's different from the other bills, and I think it's something that they would be more interested in." Anyway, I had my witnesses and all that and presented the bill, and they voted it down again. Maybe I might have gotten one vote for it. It was like 5-1 or something. And right after the meeting, I was speaking to I don't know if it's the chairman of the subcommittee or the chairman of the committee who sat in on it. I said, "This bill was different from the other bills. I don't understand why you wouldn't even consider it." And he said, "Well, I didn't read the bill, and I almost slugged him." You know, they knew how much time I was putting on that bill, and not even to read the bill, and it was not a long bill. But that's one memory I have that's a bitter memory, because I worked hard to try to do something constructive.
Yeah.
And I've never used marijuana and still not interested in it, but I hate to see people punished forever, or have something on their record that's a real blemish.
Yeah. Well,
they've done a lot since I left to liberalize it, but it's I don't know. That was I had one interesting letter. I don't think there was only one letter that I didn't respond to that I know of as long as I was in the house, and that was a letter from someone I knew fairly well, and I had made a statement to the newspaper, not to the newspaper, or maybe to a reporter. Yeah, a reporter asked me a question, and I had said, well, I thought one thing anyway. This person who was a nurse and also had reason not to act the way she did. She wrote to me a real hot letter. I'm sure she just typed it like that and punched the button and it was gone. If she had to sign it and seal it and address it and stamp it and mail it, she probably would never have sent it.
Yeah.
And that's the only letter I didn't answer because it was a nasty letter. But the one I was thinking of, I put in a bill one time for the working waterman. It had to do with crabbing and crabbing or clamming. And I got a hot letter from a physician in Virginia Beach who was a member of some sort of organization but he was saying anybody that's stupid enough to put a bill like this in ought to be shot or something. It was a really nasty letter. And I knew who the man was. And so I figured I would kill him with kindness. So I drafted a really nice, I dictated this really nice, sweet letter about how much problem that the wives of the working women were having, and why this bill would help them and it would make their life more meaningful and so forth. Anyway, then because he was a doctor, just as a lark, I just said, in the meantime, at the end of the letter, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. And the next day I was signing a whole stack of letters, and I had already signed this when I read that. You know, I didn't mean for her to type that. I just did that so my secretary would get a laugh. Anyway, and then I debated with myself, should I send it or not? And I didn't. But discretion is a better part of valor. But he deserved it.
Yeah. Well, Harvey, this has been a delight. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and I have enjoyed all of those stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah. I'd like to talk, as you know.
Well, I love to hear your stories. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.